The fondant potato. It has a reputation for being complicated to make, but it's actually very easy if you follow the right steps. So as well as being difficult to make, the general consensus is fondant potatoes can have a disappointing texture. So this leaves people asking themselves, are they really worth making? So today, in this video, I'm going to challenge these beliefs, as well as simplifying the method with a few simple tricks to make this an accessible recipe for every home cook. I'm also going to troubleshoot some of the areas in the recipe where I see home cooks overlooking some of the important little details. At one point in my career, I was making 200 to 300 fondant potatoes a day. So you could say I've had a little practice. In this first section of the video, I'll go through the traditional method for cutting fondants, then two alternatives that importantly get a consistent shape but create much less wastage. So first up, the traditional way. This can be done with just a knife, but 9 times out of 10, it will be done with a ring cutter like this. I've always disliked the amount of potato that gets wasted when making fondant potatoes. So I've always been one of those chefs that takes their time and tries to pick out potatoes that are just slightly bigger than the cutter. Then I just take the top and bottom off, creating 2 flat edges. These are the parts that are going to caramelize and give me the flavor and texture I'm looking for. Then something not everyone does is to peel around the edge to take off that hard right angle corner. This part tends to overcook and it can burn. So I'll cut a second one as well and keep as much of that hard corner on as possible. So we can see if there's any differences between these 2 fondant potatoes once they're cooked. So the second method helps to reduce some of this waste. I'm picking a potato that's got a fairly round shape in diameter and big enough to get at least a couple of portions from. Take off the tapered top and bottom edges, then slice the middle part into however many portions you can get. Then I'm peeling them and I'm going to take off that hard angled edge. This way is better because I've roughly halved my wastage compared to the first method, and I've got 2 evenly sized portions, with large flat surface areas for frying. The next method is my favourite though, because it wastes even less. So I'm going with 2 potatoes that are just a little bigger than I want my actual cut fondants to be. Take off a little from the top and bottom to create those flat edges, then just peel around to get that little puck of potato. This is my favourite method of the 3 because of the reduced waste, but my flat edges are the smallest compared to the other 2 methods. So the first cut, I've got perfect round cut pieces of potato, but with a large pile of waste. The second cut, the shape looks really nice, a similar size to the first cut, but with a lot less waste. It looks around the same in volume from this camera angle, but it's around 60% of the weight. And the third method, I have a really simple, pretty shape, but it's a lot more rounded than the others. So I have less surface area to get caramelization on when I fry them in the next step. And I'm not sure if this will affect the depth in flavor later. I guess there's only one way to find out. Anyway, that's enough potato shape talk. If I wait any longer, they'll start to brown. So on to the next step. So I'm putting a pan on to a medium-high heat. This is a 7 out of 9 for me on this induction stovetop. Then I'm going in with a little dash of olive oil. This could be any fat of your choosing, really. Traditionally, beef dripping would be used for maximum flavour, and I'm getting that fat evenly coating the base of the pan and giving it a moment to heat up so my raw potato doesn't stick. Then I'm putting each one in and I'm giving it a moment and moving it around once again to help it not stick to the base of the pan. If you're using a non-stick pan, then you won't have to do this. I've arranged the potatoes following a kind of clock pattern. So from 12 till 3, I have the 2 traditionally cut fondants. And from 4 till 7-ish, we have the 2 that were cut from 1 potato. Then the last remaining 2 are the 2 smaller ones with the least wastage. I'm doing this so we can keep track of them throughout the cooking process and know which is which. And I'm going to do my best to keep them in these positions. So from here, it's just a matter of regularly moving them, turning them and flipping them so they're all browning as evenly as possible. This does take a little bit of time, but it's worth it. This method of cooking is really interesting. It's the reverse to most recipes, because I'm doing all of the browning in the first stage of cooking, and the second stage will be the actual softening or cooking through of the vegetable. So, as you can see here, the 2 traditional cut potatoes have got good browning on already, and the others are a little bit behind. They're still a little blonder. So I'm just going to keep rotating the pan around the hob and try to get them all as evenly browned as possible. After a few minutes of flipping and turning, I'm getting some good colour. This is close to what I'm looking for, but I'm going to take these a little further. For me, this is one of the keys to a good fondant potato, is browning them enough. Because when the liquid goes in, a lot of that browning, it tends to, well, for a lack of a better term, wash off. I'll talk more about this throughout the video and you'll see this actually happening a little later. Okay, so now I'm at this stage. I'm going in with probably the least amount of butter that you can get away with when making fondant potatoes. I know some chefs that will throw in a whole block at this stage, but it's not really realistic for home cooking. So I guess this is around 40 grams, maybe a little less. The butter's doing a few things in this stage. It's cooling down the intense heat of the pan to stop the potatoes from over browning, and it's also going to help me extract the flavour from these 3 cloves of garlic and these couple of sprigs of thyme. These are the classic flavourings or aromatics for fondant potatoes. So now I'm just going to make sure that the garlic and thyme is nestled in the fat so the flavours start to get extracted. And I'm going to keep my eye on these potatoes, moving them around so they continue to colour gently but not unevenly. Now, this is where I want to be. This looks really good to me. This might look overdone to you in this stage, but like I mentioned a minute ago, some of this is going to wash off in the next step. So that's where I like my fondant potatoes to be, heavily coloured on the flat sides. Okay, so next is the stock. This could be any stock. Traditionally, it's a beef stock because they're usually being served with a beef dish. For me, I'm using a chicken stock that I got from my roast chicken recipe. And for clarity, this is the moment to get any salt into the potato. So I've salted this stock to get it tasting seasoned. Using a stock with a lighter flavour like this makes these fondants more universal with what they can be served with. If you plan to serve them with beef, then use beef dripping and a beef stock to get that deep, robust flavour. And I'm coming just above halfway up the potatoes with the stock. At this point in most recipes, this pan would now go into the oven, but I prefer to make them on the stovetop because the cooking process is a little quicker and I don't have to deal with a hot frying pan in and out of the oven. So in this stage, I need to replicate how they would cook in an oven. And in an oven, the pan wouldn't boil. It would lightly simmer at the most. Then lid on, and this is going to help steam the potatoes and get them cooked evenly. Ten minutes later, and it's time for a flip. This is where you can really see the contrast between that hard seal, which is still obvious on the top side, and once I flip each one, you can see how much of the colour has softened and washed off on the side that's been submerged in the stock. They've gone from almost overdone on the top to nicely browned on the other side. That's why I'm going to encourage you to go further than you think in that frying stage. Because if you go blonder, then some of that will wash off in the stock and you'll be left with essentially an uncoloured looking fondant rather than something that's got a nice caramelised edge like these ones have. Lid back on and I'm just going to let them continue to gently simmer for another 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so 12 minutes later and these are looking good to me. They're cooked through and the caramelization is still nice and defined on the flat edges. By the way, they smell amazing. They're soft without being too soft, so they're still going to have some bite in the middle. For me, these are the perfect fondant potatoes. They've only taken 5 to 10 minutes of frying and exactly 22 minutes of poaching in the stock on the stovetop. So roughly half an hour of cooking. Now I'm just going to give that top layer a little baste with some of the remaining stock just to keep them nice and moist. And fondant potatoes should be buttery, soft with a smooth texture in the middle. It's like an enhanced roast potato. So if I just check them with a knife, there's a little resistance in the middle. I'm happy with this. So let's have a look and compare these different cuts. So the first two out of the pan are the traditional cuts. The one closest, this one here, is the one that didn't get the edges peeled, and you can see how it has that kind of hard, crusty, angular edge. And to be honest, it doesn't actually look that bad. Usually that overcooked edge is a lot more defined than this. Sometimes they come out looking more like this. Then the next two are the ones cut from the same potato. The shape and size is really even, and they've got a good golden crust. Then the last two are the ones that are cut from smaller potatoes. So the least wastage, but the least amount of golden flat edge. So they all look good, they all taste good, and they've got a buttery smooth texture on the inside and that crisp outer shell. One thing that I think home cooks generally don't do with their fondant potatoes, and restaurants do, is reheat them. You see, restaurants can't do this whole cooking process start to finish and serve it straight to your plate. So this process up until now will be pre-done, then they'll simply brush a little stock or fat over the top of them like this, and flash them in an oven for a few minutes once the order comes into the kitchen. So this step is something I think a lot of home cooks naturally skip because it's never mentioned in a recipe. And this is why texturally I think a lot of home cooks are disappointed with their fondants. So I just brush a little stock on and flash them through a hot oven for 5 to 10 minutes. This crisps the outside slightly and reawakens that golden crust, so it's not just soggy. This does add an extra step, but I think it's what's missing from a lot of home cooks' recipes. If you enjoyed this recipe and you like the way I put things together, then you'll definitely like this video as well, so go check it out next.